It all started so gradually that I almost didn't notice at first. Liza had always been dedicated to her job, but in the last few months, something shifted. She began staying late at the office more often, sometimes coming home well past midnight, with a half-hearted explanation about a project deadline or last-minute meetings. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have periods of intense work, I told myself. But it wasn't just the late nights. There were other, subtler signs, things that, when combined, painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Her phone, for instance. Liza had never been particularly protective of her phone. We had a relationship based on mutual trust, so there had never been any need for secrets. She'd often leave her phone on the kitchen counter while we cooked dinner together or scrolled through social media while we sat on the couch watching TV. But recently, she'd started carrying it with her everywhere, into the bathroom, even into the garden when she went outside to water the plants. I noticed how, whenever it buzzed with a notification, she'd quickly glance at the screen and, just as quickly, press it against her chest or flip it over, hiding whatever message had just appeared. At first, I thought it was just work stress. Maybe she was trying to avoid distractions from me or trying to decompress in her way. But then, the phone calls started changing too. Liza used to chat casually, even laughing when her coworkers would call her outside of office hours. But now, whenever the phone rang, she'd leave the room. Her tone, once light and carefree, became hushed, almost secretive. The conversations were shorter but more deliberate. When I'd ask her about it, she'd brush it off, claiming it was just work, and then change the subject before I could push further. Still, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I'd always been the type of person to trust first, to believe that honesty forms the foundation of any relationship. But that night, the night that changed everything, was the tipping point. It was late, past midnight, and I had woken up to get a glass of water. Liza was still awake, sitting on the edge of our bed, her face illuminated by the dim glow of her phone. She didn't hear me come in, and for a moment, I just stood there in the shadows, watching. She was typing furiously, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Then, just as I was about to speak, I saw it, the name that popped up at the top of her screen. It wasn't a coworker or friend, it was her boss. My heart sank, and I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. Why was her boss messaging her this late? And why did she look so nervous, her body tense, her lips pressed together in concentration? I didn't say anything at that moment. I didn't want to believe the worst. But from that night on, the seed of suspicion had been firmly planted. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it only grew stronger with each passing day. As much as I wanted to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, I couldn't shake it. Something was wrong. It was like this invisible wall had come between us, and I knew that whatever was happening, I had to find out the truth. But how? I couldn't just accuse her outright. If I was wrong, I'd destroy everything we'd built. No, I had to be careful and deliberate. I needed proof. The opportunity came one Saturday morning. Liza had just left for a yoga class, another thing she had started doing more often. She left her phone charging on the kitchen counter, something she hadn't done in weeks. For a moment, I hesitated. My stomach churned with guilt at the thought of invading her privacy, but my mind was at war with itself. The truth was there, and if I wanted answers, this was my chance. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I unlocked it. She had never changed the passcode, another small detail that tugged at my conscience. I didn't want to believe she was capable of anything so deceitful, but I needed to know for sure. At first, everything seemed normal, texts with friends, and emails from work, but then I saw it. The conversation with her boss was right there, not buried deep in her messages but near the top, as if they had been communicating frequently. I clicked it open, and my heart began to race as I scrolled through the exchange. The messages were subtle but unmistakable. At first, it was just work talk, discussing meetings, reports, and the usual office banter. But as I kept reading, the tone changed. There were compliments and little inside jokes that I didn't understand. Then, there were late-night messages from him, asking her how her evening was going, or if she had plans after work. Messages she'd respond to warmly, often with playful emojis or flirtatious comments that were far too personal for a professional relationship. It wasn't explicit. There wasn't a smoking gun, no confession of love, or a plan to meet up. But it was enough. The familiarity, the way they spoke to each other, the timing of the messages, it all painted a picture I couldn't unsee. This wasn't just a professional relationship. There was something more, something deeper, and Liza had been hiding it from me. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back down. I felt sick, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just an emotional affair, or had it become physical? Was I just imagining things, overreacting to some harmless texts? But deep down, I knew the answer. I knew I wasn't imagining anything. I had seen the signs for months. And now I had the proof I needed to confirm what I had been too afraid to admit. At that moment, standing in the empty kitchen, the reality of it all crashed down on me. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was involved with another man. And not just any man, her boss. It felt like a punch to the gut, the kind that leaves you breathless and disoriented. But amid the hurt and betrayal, a new feeling began to emerge: anger. And with that anger, the beginnings of a plan started to form in my mind. After finding the messages on Liza's phone, I knew that confronting her directly would be pointless. She could easily deny everything, or worse, spin some story that would leave me questioning myself. The vague flirtations in the texts weren't enough to serve as undeniable proof. I needed something more solid, something irrefutable. So, I decided to take a step that I never thought I would. I hired a private detective. At first, the idea of involving a stranger in my personal life felt invasive and extreme. But as the days passed and the weight of suspicion grew heavier, I realized I had no other option. I couldn't go on living in a state of constant doubt, second-guessing every smile, every phone call, every late night at the office. I needed clarity, and the only way to get that was to have someone observe Liza from the outside, objectively and without emotion. I found the detective through a discreet referral, and during our first meeting, I was struck by how professional and detached he seemed. There was no judgment in his eyes, no curiosity about my personal life. To him, this was just another case. That cold professionalism made it easier for me to go through with it. I gave him all the details I had: the late-night messages, the frequent work dinners, the growing secrecy in our home life, and asked him to find out the truth. Weeks passed, and during that time, I felt like I was living a double life. On the surface, everything remained the same. I pretended not to notice when Liza made vague excuses about staying late at the office or when she'd slip away for an urgent call from her boss. I acted supportive, even affectionate at times, though inside I was simmering with resentment and doubt. It was agonizing, waiting for the detective's report, knowing that at any moment, my entire world could be upended. Then, one day, the detective called me. His tone was calm, almost businesslike, as he told me he had something to show me. We met in a small, nondescript office downtown. He placed a manila envelope on the table between us and slid it toward me. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, though I did my best to maintain a stoic expression. Inside were photographs. The first few were innocuous, just Liza and her boss, stepping out of the office together. But as I flipped through them, the pictures became more damning. There they were, sitting together at a restaurant I knew all too well, an upscale place we had gone to for anniversaries. Liza was laughing, her hand resting lightly on her boss's arm, the kind of familiar, intimate gesture that left no room for doubt about the nature of their relationship. There were more pictures like that: dinners, walks in the park after work, the two of them looking far too comfortable together for this to be purely professional. And then, the final set of photos hit me like a punch to the gut. They were in a dimly lit corner of the restaurant, leaning in close, his hand resting on her thigh. The look on her face, the way her eyes shone with affection, the way she leaned into him, it was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The evidence was clear. This wasn't just a friendly relationship. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My wife was having an affair with her boss, and I had the proof right in front of me. The detective asked if I needed anything else, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing, and a deep sense of betrayal washed over me. But beneath the sorrow and the hurt, there was something else. Anger. And with that anger came a sudden clarity. I wasn't going to confront her with the evidence immediately. No, she didn't deserve the luxury of a private confrontation where she could twist her words and try to salvage her reputation. If she had chosen to humiliate me behind my back, then I was going to make sure her betrayal became as public and painful for her as it had been for me. As I sat alone in my car after leaving the detective's office, the weight of what I had discovered settled over me. The pictures, the evidence of Liza's deceit, had removed any lingering doubt. But I wasn't about to lose control. No rash outbursts, no heated confrontations that would allow her to lie her way out of this. Instead, I would take my time and plan carefully. If I was going to confront her, it had to be in a way that she would never forget. That night, I stayed up late, sitting in the dark, my mind buzzing with possibilities. The anger burned inside me, but I knew I couldn't just explode and let her off easy. If she had caused me so much pain, she deserved to feel every ounce of it in return. And not just in private, no, this had to be public. Everyone had to see her for who she was. Her friends, her colleagues, even her boss. Especially her boss. I wanted them all to witness the fall of the perfect image she had so carefully crafted. The idea came to me in a flash, and once it took hold, I couldn't let it go. I would host a dinner. A celebration, in honor of her recent promotion at work. I would play the loving, supportive husband, throw her a lavish evening she wouldn't see coming. I'd invite all her closest friends, our mutual acquaintances, and, of course, her boss. She wouldn't suspect a thing. Not until it was too late. Over the next few days, I began putting my plan into action. I booked a reservation at one of her favorite restaurants, a place where we had celebrated many milestones in the past. I sent out the invitations, making sure to personally invite her boss and his wife, adding an extra layer of tension to the evening that would only become clear later. Liza, of course, was thrilled by the idea. She had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. She thought I was proud of her and excited to celebrate her success. It was almost painful to see how easily she slipped back into the role of the perfect wife, pretending nothing was wrong while continuing her affair behind my back. But that would all change soon enough. Every detail of the evening had to be perfect. I rehearsed my speech in my head, imagining the moment when I would stand in front of everyone, raise my glass, and drop the bombshell. I envisioned their faces. Liza's stunned disbelief. Her boss's panic, the horrified whispers from the guests. I wanted to savor the moment when she realized that everything she had done in secret was about to be exposed in the most public, humiliating way possible. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control, about making her feel the same helplessness and humiliation that I had felt for so long. She thought she had been so clever that she could juggle both worlds without consequence. But she was about to learn that actions have consequences, and those consequences would be devastating. The plan was set. All I had to do now was wait. The night had finally arrived. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, meticulously planning every detail of the evening. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. A celebration of Liza's recent promotion. A moment for her to bask in the glow of her success, surrounded by her closest friends and colleagues. But beneath the carefully curated veneer of celebration, there was a storm brewing. Only I knew what lay ahead, and the anticipation of what was to come made my heart race with a strange mixture of excitement and dread. We hosted the dinner at one of our favorite upscale restaurants, a place Liza adored for its intimate ambiance and exceptional food. The restaurant staff had gone above and beyond to make sure the evening felt special, candlelit tables, soft music playing in the background, and a menu tailored to the occasion. I had arranged for a private dining room, away from the rest of the patrons, so the atmosphere felt even more exclusive, more personal. It was exactly the kind of setting where Liza would feel comfortable, confident, and, most importantly, unsuspecting. Guests began to arrive one by one, filling the room with a soft hum of chatter and laughter. Liza greeted everyone with that radiant smile of hers, the one that made her the center of attention no matter where she went. Our mutual friends were there, of course, people who had known us for years, who had seen us through our ups and downs as a couple. They congratulated her warmly, toasting her success, and praising her hard work and dedication. Liza beamed with pride, soaking in every compliment, her eyes shining with a mixture of happiness and pride. Her colleagues from work arrived next, bringing with them a palpable sense of excitement. They, too, offered their congratulations, speaking about how deserved her promotion was, and how they had always known she would rise to the top. I could see how much it meant to her, how she was enjoying being the center of attention, the object of everyone's admiration. She had worked so hard for this moment. And tonight was supposed to be her reward, a night where she could finally relax and enjoy the fruits of her labor. But the irony of it all was that this very moment, which she believed to be the pinnacle of her success, would soon become the stage for her undoing. And then, at last, her boss walked in. The man who had, knowingly or unknowingly, become the other half of her betrayal. He was dressed in his usual polished manner, confident, self-assured, the picture of professionalism. He made his way over to Liza with a wide smile, congratulating her in front of everyone, his voice dripping with sincerity. For a moment, I could feel the room shift. There was an undeniable connection between them, something subtle but present in the way they looked at each other. It was fleeting, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but to me, it was glaring. I knew what they shared, the secrets they kept from the world, and I could see it in the way their eyes met. The way their smiles lingered just a second too long. He had come alone, without his wife, which didn't surprise me. I had invited them both, of course, to keep up appearances, but I had a feeling he would come solo. Liza had been careful not to make their affair too obvious, at least, not to anyone else. She had hidden her infidelity behind layers of professionalism and decorum, masking it as a close working relationship. But tonight, in this room filled with people who trusted and respected her, that mask would be ripped away. As the night progressed, I did everything I could to maintain the atmosphere of celebration. I played the part of the supportive husband to perfection, smiling, laughing, and engaging in light conversation with our guests. I made sure everyone had a drink in hand, circulating the room and keeping the energy upbeat. The laughter was contagious, and soon, even the most reserved guests were caught up in the warmth of the evening. Glasses clinked, and the sound of joyful chatter filled the room. But through it all, I kept one eye on Liza and her boss. They were careful, but not careful enough. I noticed the small touches, the way he leaned in to speak to her, his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair as they shared a private joke. The way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching, her eyes filled with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. To everyone else, they appeared to be nothing more than close colleagues, celebrating a shared professional achievement. But to me, knowing what I knew, their connection was undeniable. Liza was in her element. She flitted from guest to guest, graciously accepting their praise, her smile never wavering. She was glowing, radiant with the confidence of someone who believed she had the world at her feet. And why wouldn't she? From her perspective, everything had fallen perfectly into place. She had the career, the recognition, the admiration of her peers, and, in secret, the thrill of an illicit relationship with her powerful boss. She had no idea that, in just a short while, all of that would come crashing down around her. As the evening wore on, I could feel the tension in my chest building. I had spent so long planning this moment, imagining every detail, and now it was almost time. The anticipation was unbearable, but I kept my composure. I wanted her to enjoy this last bit of peace, to feel the full weight of her success before I tore it all away. I watched her, laughing with friends, her cheeks flushed with happiness and perhaps a bit of wine. Completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. And then, when the timing felt right, I made my move. I stood up from the table, raising my glass to signal that it was time for a toast. The room quieted as everyone turned their attention to me, their faces expectant, waiting for the usual words of admiration and support a husband would offer his wife. Liza's eyes met mine, still glowing with pride, her smile unwavering. Little did she know, this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when her carefully constructed world would begin to crumble, piece by piece, in front of everyone she cared about. The atmosphere, so carefully crafted to celebrate her success, was about to transform into the stage for her downfall. And I was ready. As I stood up, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, curiosity flickering across the faces of our friends and colleagues. The laughter and chatter that had filled the air moments before evaporated, leaving a tense anticipation hanging like a heavy fog. I could feel my heart racing, a mix of adrenaline and dread coursing through my veins. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would reveal the truth. The stakes had never been higher, and I needed to deliver my words with precision. I took a deep breath, lifted my glass, and began. I'd like to propose a toast to my wife, Liza. My voice was steady, but inside, I was a maelstrom of emotions. Not only for her career successes but for her unique ability to achieve her goals, wherever she may be. The moment I finished speaking, I watched as Liza froze, her expression shifting from one of blissful pride to utter shock. Her smile, so vibrant just seconds ago, vanished as if someone had flicked a switch. Her eyes widened in disbelief, the color draining from her face. I could see the realization dawning on her, the sudden understanding of what I was about to unveil. It was a powerful moment, watching her unravel in real time, the carefully crafted facade cracking before her eyes. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Guests glanced at each other, confusion evident in their expressions. I could almost hear the collective intake of breath, the ripple of discomfort that coursed through the gathered crowd. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation as I prepared to drop the bombshell I had orchestrated so meticulously. I continued, maintaining a calm demeanor as if I were simply discussing a casual topic. Liza is truly remarkable. She doesn't just excel in her professional life. She manages to find time for personal meetings with her superiors, even if those meetings take place after hours. At that moment, the room erupted into a flurry of reactions. Gasps echoed off the walls, and I could see the faces of our friends morph from shock to concern. The murmurs began as people processed my words, the whispers growing louder, overlapping with the shocked expressions. But the most telling reaction came from her boss. His face turned a ghostly shade of pale, and I could see the tension radiating off him as he shifted in his seat. Desperately trying to avoid the scrutiny of those around him. He looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear entirely from the weight of what I had just insinuated. As the reality of my words began to settle in, I kept my eyes locked on Liza. The facade she had worn so proudly moments ago was crumbling, replaced by a look of horror and disbelief. It was a satisfying sight, seeing the tables turn. It's fascinating how some people can balance work and pleasure, I continued. My smile never wavering, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I mean, who wouldn't want to enjoy a little extra time with their boss after hours? The tension in the room became palpable as her colleagues began to turn their gazes from Liza to her boss, questions forming in their minds, curiosity morphing into judgment. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. You could see it all unfolding, the shock and horror etched on their faces. Some guests leaned in, eager to catch every word, while others leaned back in discomfort, unsure how to react. I can only imagine how much she must have learned from those meetings, I said, my voice unwavering as I reveled in the chaos unfolding. After all, when it comes to climbing the corporate ladder, it's not just about hard work, is it? I could see Liza's hands tremble slightly as she gripped the edge of the table, her expression a mixture of rage and embarrassment. She was trapped, caught in a web of her own making, and I was determined to expose every thread. I turned to her boss, who was now shifting uncomfortably in his seat, the realization of the precarious situation settling over him. The room was alive with whispers, the guests grappling with the implications of what I had just said. I could feel the energy in the air, a mix of shock, disbelief, and, for some, a morbid fascination. Everyone was waiting for the fallout that I had orchestrated. Liza has always been a go-getter, I continued, my voice rising just slightly to command the attention of the room. But I think we can all agree that there's a fine line between ambition and impropriety. I let my words hang in the air for a moment, allowing them to settle, like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread far and wide. I could see the gears turning in the minds of our friends, their understanding shifting as the reality of her actions became clearer. They were beginning to see Liza not as the perfect wife and accomplished professional but as a woman who had made choices that could potentially ruin her reputation, her marriage, and her career. The laughter had died down, replaced by a tense silence as the truth hung heavily in the air. Liza's face was a study in conflict, her cheeks flushed with anger, her eyes darting around the room as she processed the fallout of my words. I knew she was weighing her options, whether to confront me, to deny everything, or to escape the situation entirely. But there would be no escape tonight. I had meticulously planned this moment, and it was my turn to shine. The stage was set, and the audience was captivated, waiting for the next act in this unfolding drama. I watched as Liza's facade shattered, her carefully constructed image collapsing under the weight of truth. This was my moment of triumph, the culmination of my pain transformed into her public humiliation. The laughter that had once filled the room was replaced with a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of my glass clinking against others as I prepared to finish my toast. To Liza, the ambitious wife and the astute professional, I raised my glass higher, forcing a smile that did not reach my eyes. May we all learn from her example. As I looked around the room, every pair of eyes was locked onto me, the reality of the situation washing over them like a tidal wave. I had done what I set out to do, and the aftermath was just beginning. The truth had been laid bare, and I felt a mix of satisfaction and dread as I realized that while I had exposed her, I had also irrevocably changed everything about our lives. I stood there, heart racing, the thrill of the moment coursing through me like an electric current. But as the shock settled over the room, I realized I couldn't stay any longer. I had unleashed the truth, and now I needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere I had created. With one last glance at Liza, her face a mixture of rage and desperation, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my feet carrying me away from the chaos I had orchestrated. Behind me, I could hear the hurried footsteps of Liza chasing after me. Her voice pierced through the night, frantic and pleading. "Michael, wait, please." But I didn't want to hear her excuses or justifications. I didn't want to see the tears or the anger in her eyes. I needed space, a moment to breathe, to process everything that had just happened. "Michael," she called again, her voice tinged with panic. "Just let me explain." I quickened my pace, my heart pounding not just from the adrenaline but from a deep sense of betrayal. The cool evening air felt refreshing against my skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the confrontation I had just ignited. I could sense her closing the gap and could hear the desperation in her footsteps as she fought to catch up. "Michael, please," she pleaded, her voice softer now, laced with desperation. "You don't understand." I turned a corner, striding down the street, the city lights blurring in my peripheral vision. I wanted nothing more than to escape this nightmare. I could hear her breaths quickening as she tried to keep pace with me. The weight of her presence was suffocating, I just wanted her to stop. Then I heard a new voice. Liza's boss, still inside the restaurant, his frustration boiling over. "This could all come back to bite us." He shouted, his tone a mix of anger and fear. "If anyone finds out." His words hung in the air, a clear threat laced with desperation. I knew he was scared. He was terrified of the consequences of his actions, of what would happen if the truth about their affair came to light. The implications loomed large over him, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction knowing that I wasn't the only one in turmoil. "Michael," Liza called out once more, her voice breaking through the tension. "Please, don't do this. Just let me explain. I made a mistake." I stopped, just for a moment, my back still turned to her. I could feel the weight of her gaze on my back, the desperation in her tone. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her justifications. I felt a surge of anger bubbling up inside me, and I had no desire to give her a platform to defend herself. "Just stop, Liza," I said, my voice steady but laced with a deep hurt. "You don't get to explain your way out of this. Not after everything." There was silence for a moment, and I could feel her presence behind me, the tension crackling in the air. The truth was out, and there was no turning back now. I took a deep breath, turned away from her, and continued down the street, my heart heavy with the burden of the choices we both had made. I could hear her soft sobs behind me, the sound breaking through the night like a painful reminder of what we had lost. But I pushed forward, knowing that I couldn't stay trapped in that moment any longer. The truth had been exposed, and now I had to face the reality of what lay ahead. The further I walked, the more the weight of betrayal began to settle in. I had crossed a line that couldn't be crossed, and while I felt a sense of empowerment from revealing the truth, I was also acutely aware of the fallout that was sure to come. Liza's cries faded into the distance, and the world around me felt eerily quiet as I stepped into the unknown, leaving behind the chaos and the heartbreak. A few days later, the fallout from that night began to ripple through our lives like a slow-moving avalanche. Word spread quickly, and it wasn't long before the whispers turned into full-blown scandals. The perfect facades that Liza and her boss had so carefully constructed were crumbling faster than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just Liza who was suffering. Her boss, now the subject of intense scrutiny, found himself in an even worse position. His wife, upon hearing the rumors and piecing together the truth, didn't waste any time. She left him, packed her things and was gone within the week. She had already suspected something, but that night had confirmed everything. The public humiliation was the final straw, and she wasn't going to stick around for the aftermath. Their marriage dissolved almost as quickly as Liza's and mine was unraveling. But the consequences didn't stop at home. His professional life, too, began to fall apart. The same colleagues and clients who had once respected and admired him now saw him in a completely different light. His name became synonymous with scandal, and his reputation was in tatters. There were rumors that some of his higher-ups in the company were already discussing his removal. They couldn't afford to be associated with someone whose personal affairs had spiraled so publicly and disgracefully. His actions had embarrassed the firm, and it was only a matter of time before he would be forced out. Liza wasn't faring any better. Her carefully curated image of a hard-working, successful woman was shattered. Colleagues who once admired her drive and ambition now kept their distance, whispering behind her back whenever she entered a room. Clients stopped working with her, projects were taken out of her hands, and the promotion that had sparked our dinner that night became a distant, impossible dream. In the end, neither of them could escape the wreckage they had caused. Their affair, once hidden in the shadows, was now laid bare for everyone to see, and the consequences were brutal. Both their reputations, personal and professional, were in ruins, and they had no one to blame but themselves. As the dust settled in the aftermath of the chaos I had unleashed, I found myself standing on the precipice of a new reality. Liza's world, once filled with promise and ambition, now lay in ruins at her feet. I could almost hear the echo of her shattered dreams in the silence that surrounded us. She was left to grapple with the enormity of her choices, and I knew that no amount of pleading or justifications could erase the consequences of her actions. In the days following that fateful dinner, I watched from a distance as her life unraveled. The whispers and rumors spread like wildfire through our social circles, and the once admired Liza was now the subject of hushed conversations and sidelong glances. I had taken her strength and confidence and transformed them into vulnerabilities, laying bare the truth for everyone to see. As she navigated the wreckage, I could only imagine the weight of her despair. The public humiliation must have felt like a relentless storm, battering her from all sides. I could picture her sitting alone in the dim light of our once happy home, sifting through the remnants of her life, friends who had distanced themselves, colleagues who now looked at her with suspicion, and a reputation that lay shattered beyond repair. I didn't want to confront her, I didn't want to hear her attempts to rationalize or downplay what had happened. I had spent too long in the grip of her betrayal to let her twist the narrative now. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. A path that led to revenge, a path where I could reclaim my power and dignity. The image of her sitting in the dark, consumed by regret and shame, provided me with a strange sense of satisfaction. I had wanted her to feel the pain I had endured, to understand the depths of betrayal and the chaos that it brought into my life. And now, as I watched her confront the reality of her actions, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The conversations with mutual friends became quieter, and I could sense a shift in how they perceived us. No longer was I the man betrayed, I had become a figure of strength who had stood up for himself. In contrast, Liza transformed into a cautionary tale. A warning to others about the dangers of infidelity and the repercussions of reckless ambition. In those quiet moments, I took time to reflect on what had transpired. I had taken my pain and transformed it into something powerful, something that had not only liberated me but had also served as a harsh lesson for her. She had destroyed our marriage, but in doing so, she had also set the stage for her downfall. The irony wasn't lost on me, she had sought to climb higher in her career while pushing me away. And now, she stood at the edge of a cliff, peering into the abyss of her own making. Eventually, the time came when I had to make a decision, whether to confront her and offer a semblance of closure or simply walk away. I chose the latter. I left her alone with the fragments of her life, the pieces that would take time and effort to mend. It was her battle now, and I had fought mine. I had avenged the hurt she had caused, and I felt a sense of liberation in knowing that I had taken back control over my own life. As I walked away, I carried with me the realization that life would continue. I would find new paths, forge new connections, and learn to trust again. Meanwhile, Liza would have to navigate her new reality, one where she would always be reminded of her choices. The end of our story marked the beginning of two very different journeys, one of healing for me and one of introspection and regret for her. I had emerged from the shadows, and as I looked toward the horizon, I knew I would find a way to rebuild. I had endured the storm, and now, with my heart a little lighter, I was ready to embrace whatever came next. As time passed, the weight of betrayal and heartache gradually began to lift. Each day felt like a step further away from the chaos Liza had caused, and I found myself slowly healing. I had learned the hard way that love could be as painful as it was beautiful, but I refused to let one bad experience dictate my future. Months later, while attending a friend's gathering, I found myself immersed in laughter and conversation. surrounded by supportive faces who had stood by me through the storm. It was there, amidst the warmth of genuine friendship, that I met Sarah. She had a radiant smile that lit up the room and a kindness that drew people to her effortlessly. Unlike Liza, Sarah had a genuine spirit. She listened intently and shared her thoughts without pretense. At first, I was hesitant. The scars from my past still lingered, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had endured. I was wary of opening my heart again, afraid of exposing myself to the possibility of being hurt once more. But Sarah was different. She exuded warmth and understanding, never pushing me to share more than I was ready to. As our conversations deepened, I found myself captivated by her laughter and the way she saw the world. With every shared moment, I began to see glimpses of hope. Hope that perhaps love could exist without betrayal, that I could trust again. I allowed myself to be vulnerable in her presence, and in doing so, I discovered a sense of joy I hadn't felt in a long time. We spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing, sharing our dreams and fears, and finding solace in each other's company. With Sarah, I felt safe, I felt seen. There was no facade, no hidden agenda. She was simply herself, authentic and genuine, and that made all the difference. As the months rolled on, our connection blossomed into something beautiful. I began to realize that love was not just a memory of what had once been. It was also the promise of what could be. Sarah showed me that the heart is resilient, capable of healing and loving anew. When I looked into her eyes, I no longer saw the shadows of my past. Instead, I saw a future filled with possibilities, a future where trust could be rebuilt and love could flourish. The walls I had built around my heart began to crumble, allowing the warmth of her affection to seep in. In time, I found myself falling in love again, deeply, profoundly. I learned to believe in love once more, and to embrace the possibility of sharing my life with someone who truly valued and respected me. Sarah became my light in the darkness, my partner in the journey of life, and I cherished every moment we spent together. The scars of betrayal would always be a part of me, a reminder of the lessons I had learned, but they no longer held power over my heart. With Sarah, I had found a love that was genuine and profound, a love that reminded me of the beauty life still had to offer. As we walked hand in hand toward the future, I realized that love, in its truest form, is worth the risk. It's about vulnerability, trust, and the willingness to open your heart again, even after it has been shattered. And with Sarah by my side, I knew that I was ready to embrace whatever came next, fully and wholeheartedly.